Welcome to Spandex Raygun, and in this commentary I will be watching The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is, believe it or not, one of my favourite black and white 50s science fiction films. So if you have a copy of it and you'd like to watch your copy while listening to this commentary, then by all means put in your DVD or Blu-ray. And if you don't, then I can't recommend the film enough. But if you're ready to watch it and listen, then press play now. So, The Day the Earth Stood Still, from 20th Century Fox, released in 1951. I first saw The Day the Earth Stood Still when it was on BBC Two on a weeknight at some point in the very late 80s. I'd never seen it before. It was on BBC Two. Used to put sort of black and white American films on, sort of science fiction-y type films on during the week. And I remember coming home from school, and I think it was on at tea time, or maybe a bit later, maybe after tea, sort of 6 o'clock. Back in the day when it was just tube television, we had a TV that was in a wooden box basically, and you only had, as I'm sure some of you can remember, 4 channels: BBC One, BBC Two, ITV or Anglia if you live where I live, and Channel 4. And The Day the Earth Stood Still was on BBC Two. I don't remember if I saw it from the very beginning, but I do remember it's clearly an amazing film because it left a lasting impression on me at even such a very young age, one that I've remembered ever since. Just very quickly before the film truly starts, because we're just going through the opening credits, I just want to say I'm not a film historian, I'm not an expert on this film at all. All of my knowledge of this film has come from reading film books and owning the DVD, which has a very good documentary on it, which I think was taken from the Laserdisc version of it, because the version I've got on DVD is a Cinema Reserve collection. It comes in a steelbook, and it was released in 2006, and it has some really good special features on it with a nice little booklet inside. I don't own it on Blu-ray, but perhaps one day I will. So there we go, but I'll certainly try and give you as much knowledge as I can, and if I'm incorrect, then I do apologise. Maybe you can let me know in the comments section below. But basically, what I really want to just talk about is just my feelings about the film and how it made an impact on me, and sort of how I suppose culturally important it is. So yeah, essentially the story is you have a humanoid alien dignitary played by Michael Rennie, a British actor who's sadly no longer with us. He died, I think, quite a few years ago now. He plays the role of Klaatu, who comes from outer space in his flying saucer. And he lands in Washington DC in 1951, and the reason why he's landed is to try and speak to the world's leaders to deliver a message. So of course his arrival causes worldwide panic, and when he lands, unfortunately, the army who are waiting for him think he's going to produce a weapon, or he produces something out of his spacesuit and they think it's a weapon, and they shoot him without asking any questions. As it transpires, it wasn't a weapon, it was a device that was a gift to the president, which would have told him all about life and information on other planets. And obviously he's taken into custody, and his proposal to speak to the world's leaders is refused. Because from what I understand, when this film came out, it was obviously during the height of the Cold War. There was a lot of unrest and paranoia between different countries, and there was the threat of nuclear annihilation and all of that kind of thing, or at the very least, you know, missiles and bombs. And although historically I might not be accurate there. I know there was the whole space race and you know, the whole kind of Cold War kind of feel. So we're at the point now where the flying saucer is about to land in Washington, in the Capitol, probably because you know, it's an American movie. It needs to make its mark. So the build up to this point looks very familiar, and the reason why it looks very familiar is because the film Independence Day sort of borrowed a little bit in terms of, you know, when the alien spaceships are kind of descending on into Earth's atmosphere, but even prior to that, they're being picked up by, you know, radio transmissions and satellite signals and stuff like that. So the world kind of is sort of watching with bated breath as the alien invaders arrive. So this is quite similar. You've got reports from all over the world, different radio stations in different countries, people listening in on the radio. You've got the army going out with their tanks, you've got police vehicles racing to get to where the spaceships landed. And also the opening credit sequence with the music done by Bernard Herrmann, who did, you know, many film scores, particularly for Alfred Hitchcock, such as North by Northwest and Psycho. He did the opening theme to The Day the Earth Stood Still, and I believe I don't remember the name of the instrument, but it's played on a specific instrument, and if I remember it, I'll mention it. But it's some sort of electric instrument. It's got this kind of wow kind of sound effect, which eventually became synonymous with science fiction films. But Bernard Herrmann and this film was the first to do it. So yeah, I remember just really enjoying it as a kid, and sort of even at that age, very young age, sort of sensing that there was something there. There was a story there, even though I was too young to kind of understand what the story was. And it's one of the first flying saucer films I saw as a kid, and I think I probably watched it because around that time, a TV series called The Invaders, which you may remember, was being repeated on BBC Two in the UK in the late 80s, early 90s, and that was all about alien invasion, whereas obviously the aliens in that were out to take over the Earth, but in this, that's not the case. There's just one spaceship and a friendly alien, I guess, but still, you know, you're not quite sure whether you trust Michael Rennie, who plays Klaatu. I believe it's based on a short science fiction story called Farewell to the Master, in which the character of Klaatu is discovered in the end of the story not to actually be the Master. It's his cyborg bodyguard, which I haven't mentioned yet. In this film, The Day the Earth Stood Still, there is a sort of a 9 to 10 foot robot called Gort, who in the original short story is called Nut, spelt with a G, N-U-T, whereas in this he's called Gort. And he's basically a cyborg, completely silver cyborg, no features. He has like a visor that opens up and emits a deadly, what they used to call a ray beam, a ray gun beam, that would basically disintegrate any form of weapon and person. So Michael Rennie, now in his spacesuit, is now walking down the ramp of his flying saucer. He's in the middle. It looks like a baseball field. He's surrounded by tanks, soldiers, you know, worried onlookers. Now, The Day the Earth Stood Still was directed by Robert Weiss, who directed Star Trek The Motion Picture, and West Side Story, and other important films. Klaatu's just been shot by a overzealous soldier. The design of Klaatu's spacesuit is very, I mean the whole design of it is very reminiscent of 50s science fiction. So he's got the sparkly kind of jumpsuit and the translucent sort of space helmet. And now because the soldier is shot at Klaatu, this is why Gort has suddenly appeared out of the flying saucer. His kind of role is purely to react to any form of aggression and violence and just put a stop to it. So there's that instrument being played now. I can't remember the name of it. If I remember, I'll say ventouse, but it's not a ventouse. That's a device that you pull babies out with. Right now his visor is lifted and he's now going to emit his ray beam. He's going to take out all of the soldiers' rifles and tanks and cannons. Now the actual design of Gort, his helmet and his visor which lifts, is very similar to Cyclops in the X-Men. So particularly the early version of Cyclops, when Cyclops had a visor and a kind of a, I guess you call it like a swimming hat, you know, like a kind of a very like a wetsuit, kind of a balaclava. Very, very similar. I don't know if maybe that's where Stan Lee or whoever drew the X-Men, I don't know if it was Jack Kirby, whether they drew inspiration from Gort. Now Klaatu is able to control Gort to a degree with certain alien words. He hasn't used it just then, but his famous phrase in this film is Klaatu Barada Nikto. And for all of you sci-fi geeks out there, Klaatu Barada Nikto has been used many times. For example, in Sam Raimi's third Evil Dead film, The Army of Darkness, Bruce Campbell, who plays Ash, when he went to collect it was either to collect the Book of the Dead or to return the Book of the Dead, I can't remember, but he had to say those three words, Klaatu Barada Nikto. But as we know, in The Army of Darkness he didn't say the words right because he'd forgotten them. And also George Lucas named a couple of his, I think they're characters from Jabba's palace, although I might be wrong. They might be bounty hunters, or they might be in the cantina in Star Wars. Excuse me. But there's definitely two characters, alien characters from Star Wars called Klaatu and Nikto. Because I had one of the action figures of them. And funnily enough, the weekend just gone, I've been to May the Toys Be With You, which is a Star Wars toy museum in Leicester, which is still going on at the moment, because at the time of recording this it's the 11th of September, so I think it's on until October. If you want to go, it's free to get in, it's really good, and it's just got a whole collection of Star Wars action figures. And I actually saw Klaatu and Nikto, the figures behind a glass case, and I think they are actually from Return of the Jedi, from Jabba's palace. So that's another bit of trivia that I've remembered. Essentially, from what I understand, Michael Rennie was a he was an unknown film actor, particularly, I don't know if he'd done any British films, but he was certainly, and one of the suggestions for the role of this sort of slightly mysterious but kind, well-spoken, peaceful alien was Spencer Tracy. And Spencer Tracy, for film fans and film historians, was a very, very famous American actor of this older era, the golden age of Hollywood cinema. A whole slew of incredible films. The one well, the two that I know him from are when he played Dr. Jekyll in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Although that's not actually my favourite version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The one that I think is the better one is the Fredric March one. So if you've never seen Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, then look up the Fredric March version, also in black and white. But Spencer Tracy was also in a film that my dad introduced me to, which is a black and white film, a lovely, lovely film, which if they ever were to do a remake of, I think could really work. It's called Captains Courageous, and it had a little child actor in it by the name of Freddie Bartholomew, and Spencer Tracy played I think he played a Portuguese fisherman called Manuel, and it's a lovely, lovely little film. So if you ever get a chance, look up Spencer Tracy in Captains Courageous. The other suggestion for Klaatu was Claude Rains. Now Claude Rains, believe it or not, was a Brit. He's from the UK. He was a Cockney, but he made some big films in Hollywood. He was the French. I think he was French. He was the police officer in Casablanca, and he was also famously the Invisible Man in the original Carl Amel Invisible Man film, where he played Griffin, which is obviously based on the H.G. Wells novel. And he was also he was in the Phantom of the Opera. So Claude Rains was suggested, but I think by this point they were quite well known, and in much the same way as they cast Christopher Reeve as Superman, I think the feeling was at the time was, look, Spencer Tracy is a well-known actor of that time. If he walks out of the spaceship, audiences are going to be like, oh, it's Spencer Tracy. So they felt that the part needed somebody who was a good actor, probably somebody British, just because I think at that time, you know, British actors were probably considered not higher class, but just to have a certain intonation and the way they, you know, the way we speak, and it would be based in America and it's full of American actors. It might work to have an actor who hasn't got an American accent and is British, sort of presenting himself as being an alien. And I believe somebody involved with the making of the film was over in the UK and saw Michael Rennie in the West End in a play, and I think that's how he was sort of spotted and brought into the project and obviously taken on the role. He's a very tall man and very slim, and has a kind of quite a pronounced sort of cheekbone structure and sort of jet black hair, and has a very kind face and really and a real sort of intelligence about him, but not in a kind of an arrogant way. Just a very, almost like an old-fashioned university lecturer or something like that. He's got that kind of sort of aura about him. So perfectly suited to this role. Which is why when they did do the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still in 2008, it was very hard to accept, although you could argue that Keanu Reeves can come across as very alien. For me, it didn't really work, the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, but you know, they did it, and Keanu Reeves played that role. But as we know, Keanu Reeves is a household name, so it's, you know, the intention to buy him as an alien, you know, it couldn't have been high on the maker's agenda really. Otherwise they would have done what they did with this original and Gone with an Unknown. But anyway, that's that. Just to talk a little bit about Gort, a little bit more. So obviously he's meant to be this 9 to 10 foot tall, completely silver robot, cyborg. He was, obviously it's the 1950s, so it's what they call a guy in a suit. It's not a bad suit because it's in black and white. It looks, you can't see you know, you can't see the rough edges or the seams. But it's supposed to be a completely encased sort of some sort of a metal, because he's silver, some sort of indestructible metal. And the person inside the suit was a gentleman by the name of Lock Martin. I don't know how tall he was. I want to say he's probably about 7 foot, something like that. And he used to stand outside Grauman's Chinese Theatre as a doorman, and he was spotted and suggested to stand in the suit. Now I believe, even though he was an incredibly tall gentleman, he wasn't particularly strong. So in the scenes where Gort has to carry Michael Rennie's character, because a little bit later in the film he carries Michael Rennie, because unfortunately for Klaatu, his character, he gets shot again. And he also carries the female actress in this film, who's the next person I'm going to talk about, Patricia Neal. She's the female co-star. He also carries her. In some of the shots you can see she's being held up by wires, and in sort of other shots you can tell that he's carrying a doll. So from what I understand, when you see Gort from the front, the back of the suit is where it's laced up, and then if you're filming him from the back, the front of his suit is laced up, because in one of the shots you actually see sort of the strings that tie the suit together, because I'm assuming it was made from, I don't know, some sort of neoprene rubber sprayed silver or something like that. So anyway, at this point in the film, basically what Klaatu's done is tried to speak with a representative from the White House and say, look, I need to deliver a very important message to the world's leaders. And the representative has basically said, look, getting the world's leaders and everyone together is damn near impossible. You know, we have many, there's not an awful lot of trust in the world, there's an awful lot of conflict. He's come back to him. Excuse me, I apologise for yawning, I'm really sorry. The representative has come back and said, look, you know, we're not going to be able to sort of do what you'd like us to do, so maybe you could give me your message. But Klaatu is saying it's way too important just to entrust to one person. So because he's obviously a visitor from another planet and he's essentially a security threat, they keep him, or tell him they're going to keep him at the military hospital indefinitely. In the meantime, his spaceship is still sitting out where it landed. The army have tried to penetrate the ship and break into it, and they can't do anything because of whatever material it's made from. It's an alien material, so it's completely indestructible. Gort is just stood outside the ship guarding it. He hasn't moved. They also discover that he's probably made of the same material as the ship, because I think they may have tried to have used a blowtorch on him. So while all that's going on, Klaatu has managed to steal a suit from the dry cleaners and escape the hospital. And he's arrived at this boarding house in Washington. Obviously there's news reports on TV of his escape, but obviously nobody knows, the general public doesn't know what Klaatu looks like, because at the time when he was shot and captured, he had a space helmet on. Now I don't know much about boarding houses. I'm assuming that they were quite common in America at this time, hence the reason why they've used it as an example, as a setting in this film. So basically what Klaatu's done, who's obviously played by Michael Rennie, he's got a suitcase and just an ordinary suit. He's an unassuming gentleman, and he's turned up at this boarding house to rent a room, and he meets a little boy called Bobby and his mum. I'm not quite sure who Patricia Neal, what her character name is. She's his mum. I'm not sure of her character name yet. Might be Susan, I'm not sure, but we'll see as the film goes on. Um, so basically, she's a single mum with her son Bobby, and they're living at this boarding house, and she just has a sort of a normal 9 to 5 job in an office, and she's sort of courting another gentleman, and I think we're led to believe that, or we find out later that Bobby's dad was in the Air Force or in the military, and he was killed in the war, because they go to the cemetery later on, the sort of famous one with the white crosses. Um, so in the paper it says the Savant calls meeting to study the spaceship, and Professor Barnhart is considered to be one of the most cleverest sort of scientists in the United States within this film at that time. So there is the suggestion that perhaps that if Klaatu goes and visits him, then maybe he could speak with a group of intelligent people, scientists or whoever, and bring them to into some sort of discussion that Klaatu can say, look, this is the situation, because he doesn't deliver his message until the very end of the film, and it's one of the most powerful scenes in the film, and such a powerful message, which I'm not going to spoil. I'm going to wait to the end of the film before we sort of discuss it. Oh, Helen, sorry, Helen's the name of the character, the female lead, played by Patricia Neal. You see now, there's a little suggestion there of the whole Cold War thing, because I think at this point there was what they call the Red Scare, so there was the whole Cold War situation between America and Russia, and one of the characters in the film around the breakfast table here, because in this boarding house there's other people that sort of rent there. They're sitting around the breakfast table and they're all discussing, the fact that in the press it's been revealed that the alien has escaped and he's still at large, and she's just said that she doesn't believe he's from outer space, and that he comes from right here, as in Earth, and then she sort of hints, and you know where I mean, and then another chap at the table says, well, they would come in airplanes, so hinting at the Russians. And later on in the film, the young boy Bobby sort of expresses his suspicion to his mum about Klaatu, because Bobby, the little boy, spends a bit of time with Klaatu, and Helen sort of said, look, maybe you need to sort of keep away from him a little bit, not because she's scared of him, but I think she just sort of Arlington National Cemetery, that's where they go. Excuse me, I'm so sorry for yawning, I'm really sorry. Robert Benson, Virginia First Lieutenant, World War II, died April 10th. So there's Bobby sort of suggests and says, oh, do you think he's a spy? So the film's got this sort of running through. It's basically it's the 1950s, it's 50s America, and it does sort of have this sort of political climate that's quite, it's they're not shying away from it. That's the time period they're presenting, and this is what was going on in America, and it's an American film, and this is their interpretation of what's going on, and amongst the midst of all of this alien smack bang lands right in the middle of Washington and walks out with a robot bodyguard. Now obviously the spaceship is very much of its time, of the sort of what you would call the sci-fi B movie. It's a flying saucer. I guess that's what at that time period they believed that aliens would come to Earth in. But it's still done with with dignity and style and seriousness. The film's really treated that way. Yes, it's a circular flying saucer, and it's very, very much of its time, and the robot Gort is very simple. But you can tell at that time there's a real effort to try and make it as advanced as they possibly can, so that it doesn't look anything like what Earth's technology is in the 1950s. Because when you go onto the spaceship a bit later on, it's a little bit Doctor Who, but Klaatu runs his hands over sort of sensors on the console, and it's all lights and glass and crystalline effects, and it activates the technology. And I can imagine in the 50s it looked incredible. Even though this film is in black and white, you can see that where they've used blue screen or rear projection. Or I don't know if they had blue screen in the 50s. I know I'm an A-level film studies student, but I don't know if they had blue screen then. I'm assuming they had some sort of chroma key or rear projection. Now the military are really setting up camp around the flying saucer with floodlights and army vehicles, and Gort's still just standing there. Now that was quite a cute little scene, because I didn't want to talk over it, but I'll sort of mention it now. Basically, Klaatu stood with Bobby at this little white rope, and there's lots of the general public just looking at the spaceship and what the army are doing around it, and the little Bobby's asking lots of questions about Gort and the spaceship, and I bet Gort's really strong, and I wonder how the spaceship works and what sort of power it needs. And sort of Michael Rennie's character is sort of attempting to sort of suggest how it kind of works, but he's trying to do it discreetly so that he doesn't look not look foolish, but so that other people can't hear what he's saying. And obviously he doesn't want to give it away too much that he actually does know how to fly that spaceship. And he just starts sort of talking about forms of landing and inertia and atomic power, and then he notices a couple of onlookers sort of grinning at him, and when he sort of stops and looks at them, they're like, yeah, go on, keep going. He's falling for it, and you're not quite sure in that moment whether Michael Rennie feels embarrassed or whether he's like, I might as well tell him the truth because no one's going to believe me anyway. So at this point in the film, Bobby and Klaatu have gone to see Professor Barnhart, and Professor Barnhart in the remake in 2008 was played by John Cleese. A little bit of trivia there for you. Completely different film, the remake. I may or may not do a commentary on it. It depends whether anyone could be bothered to sit down and watch it. It's not that it's a terrible film, it's just doesn't bring anything new to the table. It's a little bit predictable, it's a little bit boring, it's a little bit seen it all before. Like I said, it's I don't think Keanu there's nothing wrong with him as an actor. I like Keanu Reeves, but he wouldn't be my choice to play Klaatu. And also, he's a lot less sympathetic, Keanu's interpretation of Klaatu. When he arrives, he makes it very clear why he's there from the get-go, and throughout the course of the film he becomes more sympathetic and more human, because when he arrives on Earth in the remake, he's actually an alien who then takes on a human form. So he's very much an alien within a human body, a bit like Starman, and slowly sort of learns more human behaviour as the film goes on. And that's true of a lot of that kind of idea. They did it with Terminator 2, with the machine learning to become more human, and whereas in this, the society that Klaatu comes from is already, from the way he represents himself or presents himself, is very dignified, way above aggression and way above trivial matters, well spoken, clear thinking, intelligent, which makes much more, in my opinion, compelling viewing, because he's humble. you know, you start to realise, wow, what civilization does he come from? And with the technology he's got, what is he capable of? I mean, he's not superhuman because he was shot in the arm and he needed medical treatment, and he survived. But earlier on in the film, when I was doing the commentary, I didn't sort of touch upon it, but when he was in the hospital, it showed some of the doctors outside his room saying that the way he was talking, the way Klaatu was talking to him, even though you never saw the conversation, he was saying that he would have put a lot of medical professionals to shame because of his knowledge of biology was obviously much better. He rubbed some ointment on his bullet wound, which made it look like it had been healing for 3 weeks. And also for currency, he's got like a handful of diamonds. So, you know, there's little hints as to what kind of a civilization he's come from. The other thing I'm going to suggest here is that Klaatu takes on the name Carpenter because on the suit that he had, I don't know where he got the suit from in the film. It might have been in the room he was in. He had a suitcase and this sort of typical suit of the 50s, you know, sports jacket, tie, trousers, shoes. But there was a little ticket on the sleeve where it said it had just come back from the dry cleaners, and the name on it was Carpenter. So the customer was either Carpenter or the dry cleaners was called Carpenter. So when he arrives at the boarding house, he just introduces himself as Carpenter. Now, there is the suggestion that he's a Christ-like figure. You know, I suppose in the same way that Tom Mankiewicz, who wrote the script for Superman the movie, suggested that it had that sort of that kind of undertone of, you know, Jor-El sends Superman to Earth to save humanity in the way that God was meant to have sent Jesus to Earth to save humanity. In this respect, Carpenter, you know, Jesus is meant to have been a carpenter, and I suppose they're sort of drawing this kind of this idea, this suggestion that, you know, could we consider Klaatu a Christ-like figure coming to Earth, who's humble, is vulnerable, but also equally of a much higher intelligence and of a higher power, and is sort of going to deliver his message to us, which again I don't want to spoil, but there is that allegory there. So at this point now, little Bobby's explained to his mum that him and Klaatu went to see Professor Barnhart and been spending all day together. And the reason why they spent all day together was because it was something to do with Helen and her partner being too busy, and Klaatu suggested that he sort of, you know, he could happily chaperone Bobby around all day. And I suppose this day and age it wouldn't be considered safe for a complete stranger to spend the day with your child, but I suppose when this film was made, it was much more of an innocent time, and it wasn't something that would be considered creepy or dangerous. So at this point in the film, we're about 40 minutes in, and basically Klaatu's gone to visit Professor Barnhart. Earlier on in the film, when they went to see him, Professor Barnhart wasn't there, and there was this big series of scientific equations on his blackboard to do with some sort of scientific theory, and Klaatu managed to complete some of the equations for him. So when he's come back to see him this evening, Professor Barnhart's really impressed. Really impressed with his work. So he knows that this Klaatu is somebody really intelligent. Klaatu basically, what he wants to do is explain some of his mission to this scientist, but he doesn't want to give everything away to him. So basically, the fear is that the the civilization that Klaatu comes from, not just his planet, but all the planets that he represents, are obviously highly evolved and advanced. What he's saying in this film, his concern is that the human race at this point in time, historically, are having what he would refer to as petty squabbles, civil wars, experimenting with space rockets, nuclear bombs, missiles, and he's suggesting that at some point they're going to, or the human race are going to apply that technology to spacecraft, which could threaten the peace of other civilizations and planets. So that's something that they, or he, what he represents, is not keen on or happy about. So he's obviously come to Earth to deliver a message to the world. Otherwise, there's the possibility that the race he comes from could, utilise their advanced technology and take quite drastic action on the human race. He won't say exactly what it is, but if Gort is anything to go by, then it could be pretty catastrophic. So what Professor Barnhart is asking Klaatu to do is, could you give a demonstration of your civilization's power over Earth, a demonstration that would be dramatic and unnerving, but not something that would be harmful to the human race. So what Klaatu decides to do is to go back to his spaceship, get in contact via, I guess, his communications device, and communicate with his people, his planet, and what they decide to do at a certain time the following day. All of the electricity in the world is cut out, except for not just electricity, but all forms of technology, except for hospitals, emergency services, planes in the sky, things like that. But basically everything, cars stop, televisions go off, radios go off, trains stop, everything just for half an hour completely stops throughout the entire world, hence the title, The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is a real kind of demonstration of the human race, need to just stop for a minute, just stop everything, and just try and understand that we have the ability to really overpower you, and there's nothing you can do about it. But unfortunately, I don't think in the end it has the desired effect, because all it does, as with anything, in these films, the human race, the army, the military, we're always sort of seen to be afraid and aggressive, and very much like in E.T., where the government wanted to get E.T. because E.T. is considered to be a threat to security, and it's all of those things. Now, I do know that The Day the Earth Stood Still is considered to be a really important science fiction film, not just science fiction, but an important film anyway. I know that on the documentary, a lot of film directors really consider it to be one of the best films ever made, really, amongst obviously other films. People like Ridley Scott really praised the movie, James Cameron, so lots of film directors really praised the movie for its attempts at treating certain subject matter and science fiction in order to discuss that subject matter in a really grown-up way. It's not just sort of Flash Gordon, it's not invaders from Mars and things like that. It's not War of the Worlds, although not to discredit War of the Worlds at all, because that's a completely different story and an idea, and that's still plays in on the whole. That still is a metaphor for for some of these subjects and themes. But of all the science fiction films of this era, The Day the Earth Stood Still, George Powell's The War of the Worlds, the 50s movie with Gene Barry and Anne Robertson, that one, and George Powell's The Time Machine with Rod Taylor, Forbidden Planet. Those are, I would say, my favourite American 50s science fiction films, because, believe it or not, I saw them when I was a kid, you know, on repeat on television, and I just really liked them, really liked them. I saw Forbidden Planet much later. I saw that when I was in secondary school, because that was on Moviedrome one night, I think, and I was just really taken with it. I'd seen Robbie the Robot, you know, as a prop. I think in Gremlins, he's got a cameo in Gremlins, and I'd seen a picture of Robbie the Robot in a magazine that my brother had on the making of Star Wars, and I'd always thought, oh wow, what film's he from? And so yeah, Forbidden Planet. There's probably others, but those, off the top of my head, those are the ones that are my favourite. I don't own The Time Machine, and I don't own War of the Worlds, but I would definitely buy them. I've got Forbidden Planet, and I've got The Day the Earth Stood Still. So The Day the Earth Stood Still, as I've said, is only on DVD, but I've got Forbidden Planet on Blu-ray, but not the other two. I might do a commentary on War of the Worlds one day, but what I will say is, the first time I ever even knew what War of the Worlds was, it wasn't H.G. Wells' book, it wasn't Jeff Wayne's musical, because obviously they're tripods in the musical, as they were in the book. It was actually Joe Dante's 1985 film Explorers with Ethan Hawke and River Phoenix, one of my favourite 80s video rentals that was, which, if I can get on DVD, I might do a commentary on that one day. Yeah, in the opening sort of credits of that film, Ethan Hawke's character is he's fast asleep in bed, and he's a bit of a sci-fi geek, and on the TV in the background is War of the Worlds, and it's right on that bit where the Martians are basically coming to Los Angeles and basically obliterating all the buildings, and everyone's hiding in the church, and Gene Barry's running through the streets looking for Sylvia, and even though it's on in the background on the TV, you can hear it quite loudly on the soundtrack, so all you can hear is the sound of the Martian death ray and the explosions and the sound effects. And I remember thinking, that looks amazing, I want to see it. So I remember we managed to rent it out on video, and I watched it, and I loved it, despite the fact that some would consider it really naff today. But you got to look above and beyond, you know, some special effects, because, you know, they're of their time. You know, like special effects today are of their time. You know, even today we say, you know, CGI can do incredible, amazing things, but, you know, quite often we'll say, yeah, that looks like CGI, don't like it, takes me out of it, doesn't look real. You know, E.T. was just a puppet, you know, but didn't take away from the fact that it was an incredibly emotional film and incredibly successful one. So basically, what Klaatu's done is he's borrowed a little flashlight off Bobby, and he's gone out to the spaceship, and Bobby's followed him and wondering what the hell he's doing. And obviously there's two armed guards by the spaceship. An army truck's just pulled up, and I think one of them's going to jump in with them, which conveniently has left... oh no, no, sorry, he hasn't. I thought he had. No, there's just two armed soldiers by the spaceship. There's now sort of like a corrugated iron walls put up and barbed wire put up around the ship. Obviously, if this was a modern day film, there'd be a hell of a lot more armed security and CCTV guarding the ship. So at this point, it's literally just two hapless soldiers with tin hats on. But basically what Klaatu's doing is he's going up to a little gap in the corrugated fence, and using the flashlight he basically I'm guessing he's using Morse code and just bouncing the light on the wall, which is the far end of the wall, which will obviously get Gort's attention, because Gort starts to slowly turn around. And basically what we assume he's Morse coding to Gort is that I'm here, knock out the two guards and let me in the spaceship. He's just flashing the light on Gort's face now. Imagine in the 50s Gort being quite a scary, scary presence, even though it is just a man in a suit. My dad told me a story that my grandma, who's obviously no longer with us now, she died many years ago, but she went with my granddad to see the original 1930s Frankenstein with Boris Karloff, and the first time you see Boris Karloff's creature, he's walking backwards up the stairs into the room and then turns around. Could never understand why he walked back. Well, I know why he walked backwards. He walked backwards so that you could have that turning around moment. But it's a bit odd because you don't walk backwards unless that's what you want to do, I guess. But she screamed when she saw him, the close up of his face, and this is very reminiscent of that kind of thing. The big, tall, monstrous presence. So Gort's staying outside the ship, the ramps come down, and Klaatu's gone inside. Now from what I understand, in order to make... It's very much like Flight of the Navigator, where the ship is seamless chrome and the steps just kind of morph out of the ship. They wanted, I believe, that kind of effect with this, and obviously this is the first film to do it, so the ramps that come out for the ship, I believe they used either plasticine or clay to kind of hide the gap or the seams, and painted over it silver, so that when the ramp sort of morphs out of the flying saucer, it just seems to be part of the ship, and then all of a sudden the ramp just kind of grows out of the ship, and then when it goes back in again, it's got like a sort of a seamless feel. Obviously if you did that today it would be all done with CGI, but with this it was made of wood, I believe. Even the inside of the ship is brilliant. It's a bit like the TARDIS. It's circular, it's got lots of lights, it's got grills, it's really well lit. I mean, I love these black and white films and the way they're lit with the shadows and the lighting. Like Psycho, that's another one. Helen's come home after what I would assume is a night out of the flicks with her partner, and Bobby's basically telling her that he's followed Klaatu, or as he's known as Carpenter, to the spaceship, and saying that he's seen the robot walking up and down, and Helen's just thinking, you've had a bad dream, it's not true. Prove that Bobby's had a bad dream. She's sent to kind of disprove what Bobby's saying. She's asked her partner to go up to Klaatu's room to see if he's there, but as we know, he's not there. He is actually in the spaceship, because Bobby's telling the truth. Now, this is where he finds a diamond on the bedroom floor, which is obviously what Klaatu uses as currency. So he decides to take it downstairs and tell Helen, and that's where Bobby says, "Oh yeah, Mr. Carpenter gave me some of those in exchange for a couple of dollars, so we go to the flicks," which is obviously something that happened earlier in the movie, which I forgot to mention in the commentary. So he decides to go and have it analysed and tested, and it turns out that it's not any material that's known on Earth. He's saying he's a crook for being a diamond smuggler. It's that suspicion of him that obviously starts the process of Klaatu potentially being caught. On his way upstairs, she's noticed that his shoes are wet. And Bobby says, yeah, because the grass was wet. So she's like, oh, well, maybe he did follow Klaatu out to the spaceship. Now, she's just finishing up for a lunch break at work, and Klaatu comes to meet her at work and says he really needs to speak to her. This is the moment in the film where she's a bit unnerved. They take a lift ride, or as they say in America, an elevator ride, and basically that's when the Earth stands still, because all the power gets cut out, and within that sort of 30-minute time frame, Klaatu is able to tell Helen what his message is. We don't hear that message, but obviously it's clearly important because it completely changes her view and paranoia and suspicion of him straight away. It's only when the power gets cut out that she says she realises you are the alien, aren't you? The escaped alien who belongs to that ship. And he's like, yeah, I am. There we go, the power is now cut out. 12 o'clock. Lighting in this scene is brilliant because the power's gone out and you've got like the grills, and it's literally, they're just being lit. It's a bit like when you see them in a confession box. The way the scene's framed, she's sort of lower in the frame looking up. I mean, I know he's tall, but she's lower in the frame looking up at him. The only light in the elevator is just the light, the natural light coming through. Obviously the grills, which is casting these kind of crisscross shadows on the face, and it just really sets the scene that, you know, he's a you know, potentially a powerful, potentially dangerous presence. And obviously there's all these shots, you know, all across the world, you know, Piccadilly Circus and France and, you know, Germany. You got the Kremlin there. Everything stopped. Everything. Factories, machines, vehicles, obviously except planes and hospitals, although we don't see that, we just hear it on I think a news report later on, but that's what happened. There's a guy who can't even start his outboard motor, milkshake machine's not working in the diner, all the milking machines for the cows, you know, they're really trying to do this whole montage of the roller coaster stops on the top of the ride, like just nothing's working. Car factory, production line stopped. There's a bridge there it's really, really, really good, really effective, really effective. So the film's been on for exactly an hour and 1 minute, so we've only got another 27 minutes to go. It's not a very long film. So it has been arranged for a load of scientists and great thinkers to be available at a certain meeting place for Klaatu to deliver his important message. But it's the fact that, yeah, there you go. So the military, yeah, so it wasn't on a news report. The military have basically discovered that, basically just said that planes and hospitals are still working. So basically, because the Earth has stood still now, it's really put the military, put their back up and thinking, right, we need to go on, you know, red alert now. We need to up our game and put all our resources into really trying to find this alien. So Helen's partner has just had the diamond tested by a jeweller, and he's just clarified that he's never seen anything like it in his life. So that's made him suspicious. So he's going to make a beeline for Helen. Now Klaatu's obviously already told Helen his message, and he's sort of trying to clarify that, do you understand why it's important? I've told you. Maybe if you understand, you could help support me. And making sure this meeting goes ahead. Exactly 12:30 and the power's back on. Everything's started up again. Coaches, buses, cars, policeman's motorbike. So even though this is in the 50s, it's a really, really clever idea. Very original. So basically at this point in the film now, Helen's realised that obviously Bobby told her partner that he'd seen Klaatu going to the spaceship, and obviously he's found a diamond in his room, and that Klaatu had given Bobby some diamonds, so he's had the diamond tested and realised that it's not something that's known on Earth, so that's made him super suspicious, and obviously he's got a big mouth. The Sound of Music, I've just noticed here, is the other one that Robert Wise directed. So West Side Story, The Sound of Music, and Star Trek the Motion Picture. And there's that The Day the Earth Stood Still theme again. One thing I forgot to mention, which was at the very beginning, the opening credits, because I was busy talking, the opening credits of The Day the Earth Stood Still were brilliant, because I guess you're meant to be the point of view of the spaceship coming to Earth. You're moving through the cosmos, the stars, via planets, and the camera keeps coming in until it arrives at Earth, and then it goes through the clouds, and then you see the oceans, and the way the film starts is just bringing you from outer space to our planet. But the actual the titles on the screen, The Day the Earth Stood Still, even though it's black and white, they're done in that kind of 3D kind of comic book kind of font. So a bit like if you've looked at my Jaws 3D commentary, you'll see a poster of Jaws 3D. That the lettering is exactly the same. Superman the movie had similar kind of a font for its lettering. A few films used it. Friday the 13th Part 3 3D did. Quite a few films have used this sort of 3D text. Basically, Helen's trying to convince her partner now that that he's not going to kind of grass up Klaatu, because she knows why he's here, and it's got a very important message. And to obviously just allow the meeting to go ahead and to keep their mouths shut. But basically, Tom is her partner's name that she's seeing. He's a bit of a prat, and he wants to be famous and get his picture in the paper by grassing him up. Yeah, he gets onto the phone to General Cutler to grass him up. Yeah, she's a good woman. She's not going to fall for that moron. He's like, he's just thinking of himself. So basically, he's phoned the army. He's grassed up Klaatu. He's told the army where he's staying at the boarding house. And obviously they're going to deploy the military. I don't quite know how Helen meets Klaatu again, whether she sees him at the boarding house. She might see him at the boarding house and they get a taxi, I'm not sure. But they end up in a taxi together, and that, I have to say, as a kid when I saw this on BBC Two, the bits I remember the most were the opening scene where he gets shot after he comes out of the spaceship, and for some reason I don't remember the rest of the movie except the bit where he's in the back of the taxi with her, and they can see they're being followed, and him obviously getting shot again in the street. Those two scenes really strangely stand out to me, and it's the first time I've ever spoken about it. It's the first time I've realised it, so it bears repeating. So when I first saw this as a kid on BBC Two, what I remember most of from it was him coming out on the ramp and getting shot in his spacesuit, and Gort using ray beam to obliterate the army stuff, tanks, and then obviously him trying to escape in the back of a taxi with Helen and trying to do a runner from the taxi and getting shot. You know, it's a credit to the film. You know, to anyone it's just what, who cares, 50s black and white sci-fi movie, but to my little boy mind, it, right, yeah, so she has got a taxi, she's gone straight to the boarding house, she's clearly told Klaatu they need to get out of there. What I'll do is when I find out the name of the instrument that Bernard Herrmann used to compose the score, I will put it on the commentary as a sort of a piece of text. Now, I don't know if these extras are on the Blu-ray. I'm assuming they will be. If you get a chance, it's worth getting The Day of the Earth Stood Still. If nothing more than, you know, if you're a film fan, the extras are really good. There's basically a 70-minute documentary called Making the Earth Stand Still, which obviously talks about the director Robert Wise, and it interviews the actors that were still alive at that time. I don't know when it was made, but I think it was pulled from a Laserdisc version of the film. It's even got although it's not, it doesn't say it in the extras, but there's a guy, again, I think it might be Bob Burns. Yes, I think it's Bob Burns. He's an old guy now, but he's basically a curator for an entire warehouse of film props and memorabilia. He quite often pops up on documentaries about, you know, horror and sci-fi movies, and he's got, I think he's got the original American Werewolf Hellhound in his collection. He's got props from Alien. He's got all the Alien alien armatures and things like the Alien Queen, and he's got the flying saucer from The Day of the Earth Stood Still, the model obviously, because when they built it full size, I think they only built the front of it. The back of it was all timber. I think they just built a front, and the back was all just sort of, you know, it was just like a stage really. And obviously for the landing and takeoff shots, it was a model, quite a big model. You know, I don't know what diameter it would have been, but it would have been, you know, like a fairly large kids' trampoline. So basically, Klaatu is worried now because he's worried that if something happens to him, Gort potentially is going to find out about it, and Gort is programmed to, you know, destroy all forms of aggression and weapons. So yeah, what he's done, he's basically said to Helen, look, if something happens to me, please get to Gort and say these 3 words, which are what I mentioned before, the famous 3 words, Klaatu Barada Nikto. I have no idea what those words mean, but based on what happens in the film, I can only assume it's something like Klaatu is in trouble, please rescue him, or Klaatu is in danger. Maybe it's something like Klaatu has been harmed, and it's enough for Gort to know that he needs to go find him, bring him back to the spaceship, and use the machine to... because there's a machine in the spaceship that can restore life. There you go, Klaatu's just been shot again. So again, you can kind of see where the parallels are with the whole Christ-like analogy. You know, he's this... I guess you say what, benevolent alien, not malevolent. He's benevolent, so he's been shot once, and then he's been hunted, and then he's been shot again, and he hasn't got a weapon on him. All he's got is his intelligence and his concerns. So he's been shot. I think they take him to a prison cell. So basically Helen's now done a runner to the spaceship. Now Gort at the moment is encased in some sort of indestructible, well, say indestructible, some sort of acrylic material to kind of that the army put him in, because now Gort has activated his not his eye laser. He's doing something that's just making the acrylic disintegrate around him. So, and it's all classic sci-fi stuff, you know, sound effects, lighting effects. Right, he's just taken out the two armed guards walking towards him. So there is a possibility here that Gort is some kind of artificial intelligence, and he's somehow now aware that Klaatu is in trouble. Otherwise, why would he be activating his weapon systems to remove the shell that we've encased him in? Oh, have we stopped recording? Might stop. No, we haven't stopped recording. I thought we'd stopped recording. I think what happens is that when I stop talking, it stops. So I do apologise if there's any clipping. Right, Gort is now going to make his approach towards her, and she is extremely terrified in a classic sexist sci-fi 50s female way. But she manages to pull herself together and say the three words. Very stiff-legged walk, old Gort. Big shoes. Very much a Frankenstein, Lurch kind of character in his physical appearance. Now he's going to visor her, but she's saying the words. And after saying them twice, his visor has now gone down, and he's obviously clearly understood whatever it is that she's had to say to him. Now this is one of them moments where obviously special effects, well, practical effects have to kind of take over. So he's walked off camera, and now he's come back on, and you can clearly see the wires holding her up as he's pretending to carry her. And then obviously from this angle now, he's obviously carrying a little miniature doll or dummy. They did this a lot in these sort of sci-fi movies of the 50s. There was always a robot or a monster or something that would pick up the female and carry her in both arms, and Gort's kind of done the same. So basically he's put her inside this spaceship. He's obviously done some activation, because he obviously has some understanding of the craft. He's probably trying to work out where Klaatu is, to be honest. Then he will go and get him. Brilliant, actually, and I know it's easy, very very easy to laugh at this sort of film and these sort of special effects, because you know you can see the seams and the joins. I mean, even just there you can actually see at that angle that the laces that do up the front of Gort's suit. But you know, the design of the ship is really good, and there is a real attempt at trying to be scientifically and, you know, accurate and intelligent and creative, because Gort as a character could have easily spoken like I am a robot, you know, like a Dalek or something like that, but he doesn't speak at all. He's got no human features. He's humanoid, yes, he's got arms, 2 arms, 2 legs, he's got hands, but he hasn't got fingers. He's got this sort of, he's a bit, I guess he looks a bit like the Oscar statue. That's sort of basically like a crude version of the Oscar statue, and this is obviously the 50s sensibility and attempt at trying to do something quite modern and high tech, and not kind of cheesy and naff, you know. Which is the reason why when they remade it, you know, I don't think it's a hard film to remake in terms of its message. In fact, I think its message is more important now than it probably ever was. But it's very hard, I think, this day and age to satisfy audiences with, you know, something they haven't seen before. And you know, even though there are films that come out that have got brilliant special effects and other worlds and creatures and things like that and technology, we have really kind of seen it all before. And you know, when they did the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, I know that you know, they were struggling. I believe Scott Derrickson, who directed that film, was really sort of trying to work with the art department to come up with what could they do to kind of bring it into the, you know, 21st century. And they tried all different designs for Gort, bearing in mind the Transformers films had come out at that point, and they tried all these different designs for Gort. You know, he was everything. He was going to be everything from a totem pole to a robot, to as in like a very high-tech transformery kind of robot, all kinds of weird designs. And in the end, they just, you know, you can't beat a very simple classic design. They decided to go back to something that was more reminiscent of the original Gort, which was just this kind of humanoid, smooth, metallic figure. Although in the remake, Gort is about, I know he's huge. He's the size of Optimus Prime. He's massive, but he's made up of lots of little nanobots, which are like little individual, like a plague of locusts. Because there's a scene in the remake where Gort becomes these series of little nanobots, which when you look at them close up, they look like little locusts, and they basically can just obliterate everything in their path. Which again is another kind of a biblical reference of this plague of locusts. So, but in the film, in the remake, Gort does have the kind of the visor, kind of, well, it's not really a visor, it sort of his head kind of, where his eyes are, kind of sink inwards, a bit like the tech that you see in Man of Steel. Man of Steel that came out in 2013, the Kryptonian tech, I think Zack Snyder, who directed that film, referred it to as liquid geo, so it's that kind of a, in the remake Gort's kind of made of that stuff, but again, still very reminiscent of the original Gort. So basically at this point in the film, Gort has put Klaatu in a machine and restored some life to him, so that Klaatu can deliver his message. Even at this point in the film, I guess the time it was made, they didn't want to come across as blasphemous, so Helen has sort of questioned Klaatu and said, look, you know, does Gort have the power of life and death? You know, can he bring you back to life? And Klaatu sort of makes a reference and says, no, not at all, that's for the Almighty Spirit, you know, which I'm assuming he's referring to God. And then he sort of clarifies that the machine, they have the technology to be able to restore life for a limited period, but he doesn't know for how much longer. So we're led to believe that perhaps Klaatu, you know, hasn't got long left to live now after he's been shot twice and died the second time. So now he's emerged from the ship in his spaceship. He's emerged from the ship in his spacesuit with Gort. Helen is now walking down the ramp. A series of very important people have arrived at the spaceship. This is his famous speech.
The universe grows smaller every day. For all, or no one is secure. Your ancestors knew this. When they made laws, the government...
So essentially, what they're kind of saying, or what he's about to say, is that in where he's from, in his galaxy, they have an organisation which I guess is a bit like a fascist police state, because they've invented a race of cyborgs and technology which they've given absolute power over them. So at the first sign of aggression from anybody, the cyborgs react to it and basically just wipe them out. So because they've got that hanging over them, they have no choice but to behave responsibly and not irresponsibly, which has basically eliminated aggression. And he does clarify that it's not perfection they've reached, but it's a system that works. And obviously, cyborgs like Gort patrol the universe and the planets in ships like that. And also, what he's saying is that because they've freed themselves from aggression and violence, they're able to explore more profitable enterprises, which is what he says in the actual lines of dialogue. So basically, he wanted to deliver that message and to say, look, you know, you need to kind of curb your aggression, you know, and maybe join us in living in peace. And if we don't, as a human race, then potentially we're a risk to other races and other planets, and we run the risk of being wiped out by a higher intelligence. He's delivered his message to all of these various, and there's just a camera showing all different races, classes, religions, cultures. They've all turned up. And now he's going to return to his ship with Gort and give one final smile and farewell to Helen, almost as a thank you and take care. And as the door closes and the ramp goes up, his spaceship is now going to blast off into outer space. And even though it's, I guess you're looking at it now, it's quite a cheesy shot, but the sound of the spaceship and just watching it disappear up into the sky, it's cool. It's really cool, you know. He's off it goes, and even to this day, you know, it makes you think, oh, is there life out there? Are we ever going to meet it? And then, in big letters, the end comes flying towards us. Produced and released by 20th Century Fox Film Corporation. No end credits at all. No end credits whatsoever, just the end. So that was The Day the Earth Stood Still. I hope I've managed to give you as much trivia as I possibly can and sort of painted a picture as to why I really like it and why I enjoy it. You know, I know old black and white movies aren't really what young people today kind of appreciate, but they were on telly an awful lot when I was growing up in the 80s. You know, they were more readily available to watch on television. Nowadays it's all Netflix and YouTube, but it's definitely one worth watching, maybe on a rainy afternoon when you're at home on your own on a Sunday, or if you've got a day off work. It's worth flicking through BBC Two and seeing if it pops up again. So thanks for listening to Spandex Raygun's commentary on The Day the Earth Stood Still, and I will see you again very soon. Bye for now.